the word or the term or the definition or the logo or the mascot referring to redskin. It's tied to when Native people were scalped and the blood coming from their scalp onto their face and across their skin, and that those scalps were actually paid for. The government would pay for the scalp of a Native American. And so
Hello, my name is Sarah Pearson Collins, and welcome to another episode of The Workplace, where we have powerful conversations about race, culture, and inclusion. I am joined with Dr. Rodney Herring. Thank you for joining us, and you can tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yes, my name is Rodney Herring. I'm Seneca from the Cattaraugus Territory, the Seneca Nation of Indians. I am also the chair for the Department of Indigenous Cancer Health at Roswell Park Comprehensive Cancer Center.
So thank you for agreeing to even sit down with us and to talk about things as in regards to the workplace. And so I have like a few questions, and I guess we can start with microaggressions and those types of behaviors. What is something that people say, terms that you might find culturally offensive in the workplace?
Yeah, and I've seen this not only in the workplace, but also during, growing up and playing on sports teams that were not part of the reservation kind of athletics. Going to growing up and going through elementary school to college to graduate school and then just an array of workplaces across the country. Some of the things that I find that were, and it's hard to read, I think people sometimes have a duality of how they approach using these words you're talking about. Some I think are like, oh, it's okay to say that because, I've heard it before, nobody said anything, or I'm in a group where, there are no Native Americans or Indigenous people, so there's no reaction to it. And you hear these on TV, you hear these in workplaces, you hear them all over. But one that really strikes me sometimes is like, let's have a powwow, or they're going to a powwow, or they're having a powwow, or we're having a powwow. And so that's kind of, that's one that really, if there are natives in the room, it kind of strikes a different, we would never say that, like everybody let's together and have a powwow in a business context, in a workplace context. Maybe if you're going to a powwow, let's go to a powwow. But there's different context to it, right?
Yeah. So can you educate us on, and that's, I guess, why we're doing this is for educational purposes as well. So educate us on what that is. Because I hear it, and you know what? I think in the beginning, before I knew better, you find yourself saying things, and you don't know why you're saying them, you're just saying them because that's what you heard. Educate us on what a powwow is.
So powwow isn't, even for our region here, it isn't like, the Haudenosaunee or the Senecas or the Mohawks or Tuscaroras, is that a religious thing or is that a ceremonial thing? Powwow actually is more of an area where cultural expression happens, and it isn't specific to one tribe. And honestly, I think powwows originally emerged in like the southwestern areas of the United States and maybe Western Canada, and became like this pan-Indian kind of movement to have powwow type cultural sharings, right? And it isn't necessarily something where it's like, everybody's getting together, and it's a different context, right? So it's more of I wouldn't call it a festival either. It's a more cultural expression to share our dances, our songs, not only amongst each other, but with the public in general.
Yeah.
But when you use that in a workplace, and it's like, you probably heard that in early cartoons, you probably heard that in TV shows, and that's the importance of having cultural consultants on, I see that more and more in the workplace, but also in movie scenes or productions that really want to have a correct voice and have an accurate depiction of what these things are. But I hear that one on occasion in different workplaces I've been at.
Yeah. Any other microaggressions that you've heard or terms that you find like nails to the chalkboard?
Sometimes, and I speak in terms of all the workplaces and colleges I've been at and different settings I've been in. But I even think some of our artwork has been used in different ways, or what does that mean, or that's kind of funny, or why would they wear that, or, and that's about our ancestry. That's about who we are, many of those things. An example, be the feather thing. Oh, they have feathers, they must be native, or, and then you see some of these depictions. So, hasn't happened that I can recall, maybe once, not in, in some of the workplaces where they have a Halloween party, somebody may be dressed up as Pocahontas or dressed up in fake red feathers or green feathers, and like, we don't dress like that. That's not our culture. That's not even, those ones you buy at a store for Halloween isn't even from this region. So it's like there's multiple layers to that kind of microaggression.
So it's offensive to, like, for Halloween to dress up like a Pocahontas or
very much so.
Yeah.
So imagine going to a Halloween party and...
So I know what it feels like for when someone does it blackface. I know what it feels like for me, and so I'm wondering, and it's me being educated as we're talking. So it's offensive for anyone to do it. If it was Native American, they could do it, right? Or how does that work? Or people seen anybody do it? Yeah.
I don't think it's appropriate for Halloween to, even if you are Native, to dress up as a Native, because then Halloween is like actually from a different cultural standpoint, right? I mean, most Americans or Canadians or whatever, I don't know, it must be just Americans celebrate Halloween, but that holiday in itself isn't an Indigenous or Native American holiday per se. So to have people dress up like you, or for a Native person to dress up like a Native person, just doesn't make any kind of cultural sense. So it becomes offensive in that kind of way, and we've seen that happen in schools, and we've seen that happen in some workplace parties. I haven't personally seen that, but I've had friends and colleagues that were like, there was a person dressed like a Native person at that party. You see it on some of the fashion shows. The runway models dress in Native type apparel, right? So one, it's offensive in a way, but it's also a way of cultural misappropriation too. So there's kind of that microaggression on that kind of level as well.
So let's talk about appropriate ways of, I guess, terms for, like, so someone can say I'm Black, or they can say I'm African American. Like, are there any particular terms that you find offensive?
So there are different, like, key ways you would address someone. So for me, you would say, Onondaga. Of course, I wouldn't want to, in translation, Onondaga means people of the Great Hills. And in English is the word Seneca. Seneca is actually not what we call ourselves. We call ourselves Onondaga from our language. But people know Seneca, right? So addressing someone by their tribal affiliation is probably the best way. So if you know somebody is Tuscarora, you'd say, are you from Tuscarora Nation? And then the next level would probably be like Native American. And then maybe American Indian. But when you start blending in the Indian into the conversation, which we use often too, but for myself, it feels like, historically we know that Indian has all these mixed feelings around it because of the Columbus coming this way and saying Indians, So when you hear that, what does that mean? So that's kind of the layers of how we would, many tribes, tribal citizens like to be addressed as by their specific Native nation.
Okay. What about Indigenous or First Nation? Like, where does that fall in? Like, are those appropriate? Like, what words are inappropriate? Tell me that.
Well, inappropriate, Yeah, I think it really depends on how people feel or vibe about different words. You can never go wrong if you know that person's affiliation, you know their tribe, and you address them, or you say, I know you're from Tuscarora, I know you're Seneca, I know you're Mohawk. Beyond that, I think the overarching indigenous catches a lot of areas, right? So if you have a friend that's, say, Native Hawaiian, you can say indigenous.
Yeah.
If you have a friend that's Alaska Native, you can say indigenous. If you have a friend or a coworker that's from, say, as an Aztec or an Incan from South America, you can say indigenous. So there's different words and classifications, I guess, definitions. First Nations is usually associated with Canadian First Nations people. And in Canada, there are 3 distinct Indigenous groups. The First Nations people of Canada, the Inuit, which are more the Arctic area, and then the Métis, which are different than the United States. Definitions.
Okay.
But when you say indigenous,
it encompasses, it's like an umbrella of, okay. All right, thank you for telling me that. Okay, so what is one thing that you wish people knew about you and your culture that could change how people view Native American people?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Like I had to change it up. See, that's the thing. Like I'm learning as we talk, and so then I got to change up how I ask my questions. But go ahead.
Well, I think, this is just me sharing. One of the things that I think is really important is that we fit in a couple different categories, right? When you think like BIPOC, you think indigenous. When you think indigenous, BIPOC, you think different colors of people. You think different, brown, black. And Native Americans or First Nations or indigenous people also have another distinction, that we are citizens of a nation. So we have a political designation as well, where we are nations within the United States, for example. We are nations within Canada.
Yeah. And
so we're also not just an ethnic category or a race category, but we're also a political distinction. And if you look at some of these wampum agreements that are behind us and the treaties that are associated with these conversations, our people as citizens of our own nations do not necessarily negotiate as much in a state to state or county to tribe, because we are federally recognized Native American nations within the United States or territories, that our negotiations are with the federal government. So it's between a tribe and the United States.
Yeah.
And that makes us a little separate, because we have those unique agreements and distinctions as citizens of a nation.
I think I made the mistake one time, like I was doing a training and like we had an exercise, and I think I asked, if you're a member, a citizen of the United States, take one step forward. So we were doing and we had some Native American participants in the group. And so then it became a discussion, and I didn't even know what I said wrong, but there was a whole kind of discussion, because she said, well, I'm sovereign. And I'm like, and so, but I guess if you don't know, you don't know. So of course it's made me change up how I do things when I'm doing my trainings. Like, it really is very helpful to understand different perspectives, because your lens is just, one way, and it's about more than just one way things are, especially in the workplace. I think once we do know each other's like different cultures and different nuances of each other, it helps us to be able to navigate into workplace much better. And I just have one more question. And the question is, do you have any experiences that you want to share about discrimination in the workplace, or any type of issue or situation?
Yeah, I think discrimination has a lot of layers, including within this discrimination is also racism. And I always think back about some of the earliest example I can remember as a child growing up on racism and discrimination. And that was when growing up, and I still live on the reservation or territory, that as a child, we had to go, and our children still do, the bus ride is about 1 hour from where many of us live to the school. So we'd travel 1 hour to school, go to school all day, play sports, and then travel 1 hour back home. And reservation based and rural populations, same way. And so I noticed that our bus was the worst bus in the entire fleet. They were blowing black smoke out of the back. The seats were torn up. There were no cushions on the seat. It was just a really old bus. It had one headlight. I remember seeing one headlight. The grill was half gone, and it was just not safe. And it was an old bus. The buses that had to pick up children that were 5 minutes from the school were brand new. And I always thought to myself, why would they send that bus 2 hours every day back and forth, and it's the worst bus in the fleet? And why do the children who live off territory get a brand new bus? That was in probably fourth grade. I noticed that. And so that was my first, and I didn't know how to conceptualize what that meant at the time, but now you see it as a form of, macro level racism or perhaps discrimination. I don't know. But that was my first dealing with that. And then, so it really, stuck in my mind, and I still see some of that today in different school contexts too.
Yeah, I think that as far as when we think about racism, and sometimes it's deeper than what people perceive it to be. I don't even know how to explain it. I've had several instances of discrimination, and it might be like in the classroom and the way you speak, or it can come in a number of forms. It can. So I agree with what you're saying. What are some things that people do that you may find offensive?
I think, whether it be in the workplace, and this may have happened in the workplace, maybe not so recently, but in the past. And I see it in the news, I see it at schools, I see it in all these different levels. But the word or the term or the definition or the logo or the mascot referring to Redskin. And if you know the true history about what that means, it's a really, there's two different views to that, right? There's organizations that use that, or employees feel comfortable using it because the schools in their region are using that word. And it's a really from an indigenous or Onondaga or Seneca or Haudenosaunee framework. It's something that we would never use. And it's tied to historical things and historical traumas of the past. It's tied to ways that, I don't know if you know the whole history around that.
No, I want you to give me a rule.
So it's tied to when Native people were scalped, and the blood coming from their scalp onto their face and across their skin, and that those scalps were actually paid for. The government would pay for the scalp of a Native American. And so those are kind of the ties of what that word means. Bring it forward to today, and having to go into a school, for example, or even a workplace to hear that, or if you're playing a team that their mascot is related to Redskin, and you have Native players on the other side, and they're cheering "Go Redskin." What does that mean? How do you feel? How do you feel as a student? How do you feel as a parent? How do you feel as a community? So those are really important kind of conversations, not only here, but nationally and internationally. And New York State actually has recently passed some policy, I understand, around removing that terminology from schools, from organizations within the state.
And when I heard the changing of the names and all of that, especially in football, I paid attention to it, but I didn't know all the ins and outs, and I definitely didn't know the history. So I thank you for even spreading, shedding that light, because I don't know, people don't pay attention to anything. They might see a headline and they like skim it, and they don't really know the reason why, because sometimes people might think, oh, well, they're just, they just don't want that name on there. And I'm saying they as in Native American, but if they understand like why, then I think people will be more open. And I didn't even know that that's exactly what that the term Redskin. I know that we were in high school. I was a Seneca Indian. I mean, that was the name of our school, and that was our mascot. The fact that an Indian is a mascot in the first place is just, when I think about it, it's just so like, it's degrading. It really is, and I guess you just don't take time to even think about the things that we're saying and what we're doing and who we're repping, because I was a cheerleader for the Seneca Indians, and the things that we chanted, it had the word Indian in it, and I'd never thought or stepped out of my shoes to see that there might be someone indigenous out even in the audience. You know what I mean? Like, you're so engrossed on your own stuff. Like, I would be ready to probably fight if someone called me out of my name or misrepresented my culture, my race, and yet I only can see like these blinders, and it's happening to other people as well.
Yeah, and I think the best approach is to ask the people what they think. So you ask a sovereign nation, what do you think about us having you as a mascot? And you'll get an answer, a response. And it isn't like when you say like, oh, we're Iroquois schools, for example. There's Iroquois schools all across the country. Yeah. And first thing, Iroquois is a French word, and it was a misinterpretation by the French of a derogatory name that another neighboring tribe was calling the Haudenosaunee, because they didn't know our word for us. They called us a derogatory term, which became a French word, Iroquois, that transcended into the United States. Wow. We don't call ourselves Iroquois. Yeah, we're Haudenosaunee. And so when you ask for permission to even use that French word that came from Canada, was translated into a U.S. kind of thing, that you have to ask not only one nation, you have to ask all 6 Haudenosaunee nations for approval to use that terminology or that definition. And so there's a lot of context around that, locally and nationally and internationally as well.
So thank you for joining us. Thank you for educating us on this topic for this month. This is Native American Heritage Month, and I'm Sarah Pearson Collins, and thank you for joining us.